I said I'm really unhappy at work. I was taught that in a lifetime, you may experience on average 5 different career paths. And I found that I used to be able to succeed in a fast paced environment and it was fine. But actually, it's not my actual pace that I like to live at. Guess what? When you have an increased sense of clarity, you get increased confidence, you get an increased sense of fulfillment and purpose in life, which in turn decreases your stress levels, decreases your illnesses, and prolongs your life expectancy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Radiant Awakening. I am so excited to introduce you to our guest today, Thuy Nguyen. Thuy is an amazing person. She's a wife, a mom, and a life coach and a nurse, and we are just so excited to learn from her today. So thank you, Thuy, so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm excited about our conversation.
Yeah. So start us off, just take us on the journey of you. Where are you from? What's your story? Where have you gone in life?
Yeah, because that it's all a huge culmination, right, with all of my life experiences. So I'm based in Northern California, Lincoln, California, and my husband is in the Air Force. So we go where the Air Force takes us, and that's where we are right now. And previous to that, I was from the Bay Area. And I had grown up in a really deeply Vietnamese Catholic community that was really obsessed with preserving their culture and our faith coming out of the Vietnam War. And growing up in a household of 6, being number 5 meant I had a certain hierarchy of the significance of my voice and contribution. And then I went through nursing school. And as many people know from the pandemic, or maybe it was already there and it became apparent for people with the pandemic, that nursing is, for me personally, and for many people who join the field, it is to be a bedside professional loved one. It's having the skills medically, but still being a human being for that person who's stuck in the hospital or stuck in this medically compromised place. However, we as nurses didn't always get to practice that human component. We were really pressured by numbers, by metrics, um, and there was always a lot more work expected of us than this quality life for us showing up. And so it added up to a lot of burnout. And for me, it drove me into a car accident. Potentially, if you look back at it, it really could have been like a divine message for me that I took too long to leave. But I rear-ended a car on my drive home one day and I hit the windshield. I had a concussion and it really would have been extremely stubborn and egotistical of me to go back to work. It really would have been a real suppression, and a real obsession of clinging to my title and my income if I had gone back. And so I would say since 2017 has been my own personal healing and personal development journey. But then really since 2023, since my accident, then I transitioned from psychiatric nursing, working with people with mental health issues, being on involuntary holds or needing to really uproot themselves from their personal life just to focus on themselves and have some really acute concentrated time on themselves, then I went into hospice nursing, and then I fell into life coaching. And this is where I am. It's a culmination of years and years of ministry work, thankfully, years and years of mental health, working with people through transitions, grief, and loss in hospice, and realizing, like, oh my gosh, this is a whole nother element of healthcare that I get to be a part of. And it's so exciting.
Amazing. I love the the hindsight that you have to be able to see, like, I was on this journey, I was on this path, and then this really scary, tragic thing happened to me, and it changed the trajectory of my life because it allowed me to see that the way that I was living before and my focus before wasn't really authentic to who I was. Can you talk a little bit more about that shift for you?
Oh my gosh, yes. And you said it so well. How do we know if we are living authentic to ourselves? And I feel like talking about that part of being Vietnamese, coming from parents who felt like they needed to make a new life for us, made them very protective, very obsessed with our careers as well, saying, "We came over here for a better life, and you must be the fruit of that better life. You must make us proud." Um, and they were very, very conservative with career options for us. And that's to say that our parents, historically, if we were born in Vietnam, we would have just been on a farm, taking over the family farm, something like that. And it wouldn't have been any question. And then here, when you come to another country, you don't know the language or the culture or just how to set your child up on the best path. And so their response to that was by being controlling, and telling us what direction to go in, and not really fostering us with conversations of what do you enjoy? What would give you life that can also help you make money at the same time? And for me, I'm so thankful that I fell into nursing purely based off of the fact that I wanted to be a first aid nurse for our ministry groups. I was like, we need this everywhere we go. Um, so that's really what my main focus was. And I don't think I would have recognized nothing was wrong until it started becoming apparent. The main thing was colleagues, people were starting to show up very minimally for the patients and more for a paycheck. So they weren't bringing their best selves to work. There were many times that decisions were made out of integrity, out of a standard of excellence, um, and not in the best interests of the patient. And that's when it started really hitting me. Started really hitting me when it seemed apparent that the health insurance was driving who we were accepting into the hospital, even if there were people who would absolutely benefit from our services. But, oh, we don't accept their health insurance, so they need to go somewhere else. Um, Even if they're in our own emergency room. And then, yeah, seeing the way that my colleagues showed up differently, it really shifted from the previous generation of nurses that I had been working with, and they all retired as a wave, um, up to about 2018, 2019, and then the pandemic. And so it was just a brand new wave of people. And I don't think I recognized it. I was constantly asking myself what was still bringing me to work, what I still loved. And that was probably one of the signs when I needed to start convincing myself, what am I still showing up for? And then the other thing was that I started having GI issues that I never had before. It was like clockwork that when I went to work, I was charge nurse by the time. And I didn't have any stomach issues at all. I wasn't feeling stressed in my body. My blood pressure has always run very low, but I would just like find myself that when I go to work, gosh, guys, I've got to go to the restroom. Something is running through my body. Um, and then probably one of the last things was that I had a fight with my husband. And my husband was not the thing. He was, unfortunately, the object in front of me, right? So and then he ended up kind of being the vehicle for my frustration. And when we had gotten down to why I was upset, I actually didn't even address the thing that he thought I was upset about. It ended up just being verbal vomit. And I said, "I'm really unhappy at work." That's what it looks like for me.
Yeah. And I'm hearing you said that were kind of outside of the bounds of what you would consider integrity and excellence, and so those things seem like uh, values that you have, like things that you really value. And to be in an environment and a part of something that's operating so far outside of your values, the care and the charity towards people that you were wanting, what I'm hearing is that it caused a lot of, like, even somatic symptoms for you, that it was so far outside of, one, your value and your authentic self, or two, your authentic self, that you weren't that you were manifesting that physically. So now that you realize that you were kind of having this experience, these somatic symptoms, operating outside of your values, how did you then kind of like, then did you immediately know what you wanted to do next? Was that some soul searching? Like what happened next?
That is a really good question, and I think what's so important about that question is that whenever we ask ourselves, "What is next?" we often look at what someone else is doing, what someone else has done. So we start to explore, what path did this other person take? What path have other people taken, right? And so I think that there was definitely a time that I was looking up nurses who were leaving the field. That was one. Another thing was when I had moved for the Air Force, then it was looking at what jobs are in this area. Um, and then ultimately, and this is why I'm saying the car crash was so important because I, as well as many people, may have continued to drag my feet with nothing compelling enough to take me away from that environment. So that means that I myself am saying there's probably a lot more about me within me that I was willing to let die as a trade-off to continue being somewhere that was familiar and certain and a false sense of safety, even if it was maybe a financial security, but not emotionally and not mentally. And so I really had to recover from the concussion. I took time off from work. Fortunately, I was a part of a women's coaching program. And fortunately, I was already plugged into therapy. What would be the case for people who were not doing that? I find that it's such a transition for you to establish rapport with a therapist. And if coaching is new to you, you have no idea and you're not reaching out and you're not using resources. And the most resourceful thing people can do, but may not have the best outcome is just Googling, right? Because it's not specific enough to you. And so fortunately, I had those two. I had learned that when I hit myself here in the forehead against the windshield, that I had lost my unhealthy coping mechanism of analyzing or using a personality performative type front. And it just meant that I couldn't be fake. I couldn't even be fake to myself. It was going to hurt. It was literally going to give me a headache, and a body ache. And so I fell into hospice nursing. I needed work that was more local, that it wasn't going to have a commute. I needed work that felt heartfelt, work that was not going to have screaming patients. There was a time in my life, pre kids, pre really long commute. By this point, I was commuting 2 hours, whereas I used to commute 20 minutes. So, I wasn't going to have that commute to have to deal with. I wasn't going to have to deal with the unfortunate circumstance when people end up in restraints for trying to be violent towards us or themselves. And so I was just doing interviews, but I showed up differently in my interviews. I was extremely vigilant to ask the employer just as many questions, probably, as they were asking me. And I fell into hospice nursing that way. And so I would say the coaching, therapy, and the way that I showed up different in job interviews to know more specifically what I needed in a healthy work environment.
Yeah. I love this switch and transition of like from, you know, I need to be good at my job. I need to do these things for other people. I need to show up to work and succeed versus like, no, like I need things from my employment too. Like I need not to have a commute, and I need a safe work environment, a supportive work environment. I need to make sure that this what I'm doing aligns with my values and my integrity. And I think that comes too with one identifying, who you are, what you value, but also there's so much evidence of your self-worth of okay, now that I know what I value, I'm not going to tolerate less. I'm not gonna tolerate things that don't serve serve my purpose, my values, the things that I need in my life and don't give me what I need. Um, I think there's power in that of being able to say, you know what, like I have needs too, and I it's okay that I construct my life around what I need for myself and my family.
Yeah, exactly. And that's probably the transition we all have to make, right? When we are young professionals, we feel like we have the time and the energy to make all of these sacrifices, and it's going to be worth it in the long run. And that could be a compromise in what's the work culture like? Is it kind of like a vulture type where the seniors prey on the young, right? And then what is your commute like? What are your work hours like? How is it impacting your lifestyle? And I really find that people who have families, who have children, who have spouses, who have really loving, caring family members to reflect back that concern for them, then those would like really be your signs. But some of us continue to make those excuses. And then to be honest, I got better. I ended up at a better company for sure, but once I ended up in it, I did realize this is still demanding a lot of me. Something about hospice nurse case managing or home health nursing also is where you become the main pilot of someone's health care. You have to coordinate with family members, with bath aides, with social workers, with LVNs, with chaplains. So we have this whole healthcare team, and yet the nurse is still the driver. And it ends up making the nurse buy in so much into the outcome and the quality of care of their patient. They take them on as their own loved one, like I said, which seems to be one of the biggest goals for nurses. And yet they also sacrifice themselves. And so I wasn't having that time management balance that I needed with my family. So again, it was time for me to reevaluate. And that's probably one of the most important things that I've had to learn over and over again. That contrary to the way our parents grew up back then, they were told, you're going to find a job. This job is going to be loyal to you. You are going to be loyal to this job. And in return, when you work for them for 20 to 30 years, they will give you a pension, right? That's where our parents were coming from. And that's just not the case now. And I feel like my generation gets confused with that. The following generation does not really. They're sometimes you would question their work ethic, but at the same time, they probably have a really good sense of their self-worth at the same time. And so they have really great boundaries. And so for us, it's just being willing to accept, like, okay, I remember I was taught that in a lifetime, you may experience on average 5 different career paths. And I don't know if that number is higher now with the change in our work culture. And so for us, it's to say, I need to be vigilant and I need to be accepting and I need to be okay with change and thankful for it when there are signs around me that things are not working and it's time to pivot and to honor myself, to know that I deserve that pivot. And the only thing that would really be holding me back, it potentially could be the fear of change and maybe the lack of support that could be fortified externally, like I said, with loved ones who are reflecting back to us what needs to change, or life coaches or therapists, things, people like that, who could help us along that journey.
Absolutely. And so now you've made this transition into life coach. Tell us about your life coaching.
Yeah. So I found out about Tony Robbins personally for myself in 2017 doing Unleash the Power Within. And then I went on to do his signature programs, Date with Destiny, as well as Leadership Academy. Um, and then, and that was really huge for me. I really had learned such important tools from him about, gosh, how big his personality is and how he was so go big or go home. And that was his thing, his personal testimonies. He'll tell you about how the one time he got someone to quit smoking and he sat with them in a hotel room and made them smoke consecutive boxes until they like cried and wanted to throw up. So that was, it turns out there's a term for that, and it's very masculine. And it could also be toxic masculine too, right? And so there was something that I loved about how big the energy was, and somehow it wasn't in full alignment with me taking action. Because look at me, I was not taking big actions. I was not going to school and completely changing my career. I was not leaving my job with certainty that I'm ready to transition into something else. I was really slow. And I've learned that the term is for me to relate to is being a slow cooker. So you could be a slow cooker or a pressure cooker. I ended up being a slow cooker. And I found that I used to be able to succeed in a fast paced environment and it was fine. But actually, it's not my actual pace that I like to live at. It just, it's what I was doing and I was keeping up with it and I was fine with it until I wasn't, until work was not my life, until I had a family, until I realized I need to have more energy and it needs to go into different buckets. And work doesn't nurture everything. It's not the love of my life. It's not my physical health. Um, right? It's not everything. And so how do I nurture the things that truly will give me life as well? So I ended up staying with hospice and finding out that my dad at that time was qualifying for hospice. And he lived 2 hours away from me. He wasn't on hospice. So there was a divine reason behind all of this, right? The car crash was because I took too long to leave my job. And I ended up in hospice only to find out this is the exact journey my dad is beginning. And how thankful I am to have ended up in that role to guide my family, my siblings, and my mom's through it. We're all very, very analytical, high functioning people who must know what's going on and why in order to get us on board and cooperative with care. And so none of us could have understood that in life, there is suddenly a transition from helping you live as fully to helping you die peacefully and with dignity. And so that was the transition we were making. And I was so grateful to be there. But again, it was still very demanding having a young family and also going home every 2 weeks, 2 hours to see my ailing father as well. So you could kind of see how does that work? You're working 40, kind of 40 plus hours per week. It bleeds into your time. And then every 2 weeks, you're traveling 2 hours to go see your ailing parent. And then you have to come back and do it all over again. So it was very unsettling. It was very exhausting. And when we had our second child, then that's when I had said, I don't know what it'll be, but it can't be this. And I'm really so thankful that my husband gave me that blessing to cut back in hours. And in that time, then I had joined the Jay Shetty certification program. And Jay Shetty, he's really viral, right? He's written the book Think Like a Monk. He created his own coaching certification program, and his motto is to make wisdom go viral and to change 1 billion lives by helping people become life coaches to touch people, raise awareness about the impacts of life coaching. And the main thing that stood out to me was when Jay Shetty, right? Because from healthcare, I still wanted to be evidence based. So he was really helping me feel clear on the idea that what kills us? Stress kills us, right? Stress becomes the high blood pressure, the IBS at work, the self destructive eating, which becomes high cholesterol. It becomes the self neglect that perpetuates illness. And so when we are not asking ourselves what we need to do in our careers, when we are not asking ourselves what's not working, and when we don't have a clear direction on where we're going, we will continue down that path of shortening our lifespan. Where in hospice, I find some people hope to change their mind and to change the direction of their life. And by then it's too late. So what a contrast and what a gift it was for me to see that, right? And so I learned, oh my gosh, this is healthcare too. So you're telling me that when I trust my goals in the hands of someone else who has the skills that I may not have, but they've worked with so many people that they have an idea of how to help me get to my goals and my outcomes, that my quality of life improves. And they help me gain clarity on what I really, really want. I may say I want one thing, but it's totally off, a little off target from what it really is. They help me have realistic goals. They reflect back to me where I may be avoidant, playing small. And then they also sit with me in the discomfort in order to move forward. And guess what? When you have an increased sense of clarity, you get increased confidence, you get an increased sense of fulfillment and purpose in life, which in turn decreases your stress levels, decreases your illnesses, and prolongs your life expectancy. So, who knew what a huge component of healthcare life coaching is? And then the work was just up to me to niche down to figure out what type of people I wanted to serve. And for me, based off of my life experience, it has ended up being so far to work with moms and professionals who are over functioning, overwhelmed, and burnt out. And they see it in the lack of their quality of life, the dread and avoidance that they have for showing up daily in their life, um, their overwhelming sense of obligation, lack of sense of option to do otherwise, as well as relationship strain or financial binding.
Yeah. No, I think that's so important. I think that a lot of times that demographic or a lot of us in general, when we have that like high functioning, over functioning drive, there's usually this like, I have to do this or else. And then there's like an I am statement after it. There's an identifying statement. So I have to work really hard or else I'm lazy. I have to work really hard or else I am a failure or I'm not enough. And so I have to do this. And so really finding that like that thought process of why are we pushing so hard? Why are we pushing ourselves to have, stomach issues and high cortisol and stress because of fear? What's the fear that we have that is driving us? And usually it's like this fear of what it means about who we are and our identity. And I
Yes.
love that you're addressing that because I think it's so prevalent um, in men and women, and it shows up in different ways. But I can speak having been like kind of recovered over functioner.
Yes.
Definitely like coming from this idea of having to prove your worth through what you produce and realizing that your worth is already there. Is there anything you want to say about that or?
I mean, I'm sitting here and it fills my heart to hear your self-awareness and how you had your own personal conversion and awareness to that too, right? It's like a rebirth. It's and what are you rebirthing from, right? And it's from societal misinformation and patriarchy. And again, it could be generational. It could have been all these fears. It was really hopes and dreams for you, but it came off as fears and controlling and pressure for you to make a contribution, and that your net worth was somehow tied to your self worth. And over time, especially as women and mothers, the perceived value of our contributions was just going down and down only because no one could ever put a dollar amount to it. So it was invisible work that was being done. And I don't know if you ever heard of the book Fair Play, but that book purely there's a documentary about it now on Hulu, but there's a book and there's this supposed card game. It's really a conversation card deck. And it was really to depict how women were always holding down the fort at home. And then when the husbands went to war, then they needed to start making more of a financial contribution at home, but the work responsibilities never went away. And then it just became this double standard that we had to regulate over and over again. And if we're not in a supportive environment with women, then we are also pitted against each other. And if we were sitting by ourselves with the toxic information that was handed down to us by generations before us, somehow in this generation, in this culture, it ends up being extremely isolating, right? And demeaning and belittling. And I really felt really, really similar. And again, I couldn't have done it alone. I ended up, there's a part of me who has spent years and years working with therapy. I still have my therapist from I had my quarter life crisis, um, which I think one in people experience. So that was when I was 25, right? And 25 is apparently the age where it's like you're done with college, that professional bubble has burst, and you're not sure where else you're going relationship wise. Where's my life partner? Lots of questions at that time. And so I still have my therapist from that point. We don't meet regularly, but she's really just available for as long as I need her. And I still have a different therapist right now. And the reason why is because my therapist is, to be really transparent, she's out of pocket. And I feel like that's really worth noting that the accesses we have to mental health also vary by our accessibility, and that health insurance drives the support we can get. And they define it and they also limit it, right? And so if your health insurance doesn't cover it, can you cover it by yourself? Can you prioritize it? A lot of people have this idea that everything I want to do for my health must be paid for by health insurance, but you're not entitled to that. And you don't know that until you have to enter the system and you have to access these services. And then you're being told, oh, we're not going to pay for that. We're not going to pay for that. We're not contracted with this office. You only get to go to in network. Or this is the payment when you go to somewhere that's out of network. Right. And so for me, I grew up allergic to peanuts and dairy and eggs at some point in my life. And I had asthma. So I was being taught early on, my blessing in disguise, that healthcare is non-negotiable. Okay, so I those were my blessings in disguise. Same thing with the concussion. The concussion is not well recognized in Western healthcare. If it can't be seen and measured on an MRI or a CT scan, then it's not a real issue and we're not going to pay for it. And so, again, something like life coaching comes up because life coaching is not something that may be paid for by healthcare. And and you can go to therapy, which is wonderful. However, a therapist who is contracted with healthcare is required to work with you for as long as you are having impaired functioning of some sort. You have to have a problem, and they have to chart in order for them to get reimbursed. So it always has to be apparent that you have a problem. But once you have no problems, once you look like you're a decent functioning human being, you may not get that coverage anymore. So again, the life coach pairs really well for people who, like me, are doing the work. I'm doing the personal healing. But does that mean my life is at its peak? No, because I still need someone to help me with that sense of carving out my identity and becoming very clear on my goals. And if anything, if they have skills to share with me, then it accelerates my outcomes.